Welcome back to Geoscope. Today we will speak on the current crisis in Nepal, the causes, recent developments, and implications. Nepal is undergoing one of the most intense periods of civil unrest in its recent history, driven primarily by youth-led protests, deep frustrations over corruption and inequality, and a controversial social media ban. The crisis began on September 5, 2025. Citing failures to comply with a new Digital Services Act, the Nepal government ordered a sweeping shutdown of 26 major social media platforms. Officially, the government claimed the move was to curb misinformation and compel tech giants like Meta and Google to register locally. The ban was immediate and total, plunging the nation's digital sphere into an unnerving silence. But the timing was explosive. The ban came as a viral trend. Nepo kid culture was reaching a fever pitch. Feeds were filled with images of the children of elites showcasing extravagant lifestyles, luxury cars and foreign holidays. For millions of young Nepalis facing a staggering 19% unemployment rate and the prospect of migrating for labor, these posts were not just displays of wealth, but of unearned privilege, widely believed to be funded by corruption. The trend laid bare a deep systemic inequality, fueling potent online anger. Against this backdrop, the shutdown was seen as a blatant attempt to silence dissent. It wasn't interpreted as a regulatory action, but as a desperate move by the ruling class to pull the plug on a platform exposing their hypocrisy. The ban became a powerful symbol, a spark igniting years of simmering grievances over systemic corruption, rampant nepotism, bleak economic prospects, and a profound sense of generational injustice. For the nation's youth, it was the final straw. Almost immediately, spontaneous protests erupted in Kathmandu, led by students. What began as peaceful demonstrations demanding online freedoms quickly morphed into a wider anti-government movement. The state's response was swift and brutal. Security forces met protesters with tear gas and water cannons, but as crowds held their ground, the situation escalated dramatically. Reports confirmed the use of rubber bullets and, shockingly, live ammunition. On September 9th alone, at least 19 protesters were killed, with some rights groups placing the total death toll as high as 34. Hundreds more were injured, turning the capital's streets into a battleground. Protesters, many of them young people from Generation Z, moved from online activism to mass mobilization in the streets of Kathmandu and other cities. On the 9th of September, hundreds or even thousands of protesters stormed the federal parliament building in Kathmandu. The protesters breached police barriers, entered the parliamentary complex, and set parts of the building on fire. At the same time, government buildings, including the Prime Minister's residence, the President's residence, party headquarters, and nearby administrative offices, were vandalized or torched. The Prime Minister, K.P. Sharma Oli, subsequently resigned and reportedly fled to a military barracks. The Nepal army and security forces were deployed in large numbers, and the president called for calm and dialogue. A nationwide curfew was imposed in Kathmandu and other cities: Burgunj, Pairahawa, Butwal, Pokhara, Itahari, Damak. Commercial activities, courts, and banks are gradually reopening but under heavy security presence. Indian authorities advise citizens to defer travel to Nepal and to shelter in place if already in Kathmandu, citing the turmoil. The army has taken control of key infrastructure, including the international airport, in attempts to restore order. The protest movement remains largely decentralized and youth-led, with a strong presence of internet activism, reflecting a generational challenge to elite rule. With the Prime Minister's resignation, Nepal is plunged into a dangerous power vacuum. The immediate challenge is forming a new government, a process historically fraught with infighting. This political maneuvering unfolds against a backdrop of unabated street protests, where the demand is not just for a new leader, but for systemic change. President Ramchandra Paudel has initiated urgent consultations, committing to do everything possible to resolve the crisis. While his powers are largely ceremonial, his role as a neutral arbiter is now critical. He must persuade rival factions to find common ground, a monumental task given the deep-seated political mistrust. Analysts suggest this crisis highlights profound fractures. Decades of nepotism and corruption have eroded public trust. This is compounded by weak economic growth and limited job opportunities, fueling widespread youth disenchantment. It also exposes the fragility of governance in Nepal's new federal republic structure, where policy paralysis has become the norm. Broader geopolitical concerns also loom, as Nepal sits between India and China. Both regional powers view a stable Nepal as crucial, having invested heavily in its infrastructure. Prolonged instability could jeopardize these projects, disrupt regional diplomacy, and upset the delicate balance that allows Nepal to function as a strategic buffer state. Nepal is at a crossroads. The key question is whether this youth-led uprising will force deep structural reforms, or if the establishment will return to business as usual. The entrenched elite has a history of weathering such storms with only cosmetic changes. The coming weeks will reveal if this moment can truly become a turning point. The path forward is far from certain, and decisions made now will shape Nepal for a generation. Based on our analysis and conversations with experts, we can outline three primary trajectories for the nation in the coming weeks and months. First, the most optimistic path: a negotiated interim government with deep-seated reforms. Here, the military facilitates dialogue between the political class and protest leaders. An interim leadership of respected technocrats and youth representatives emerges, tasked with steering the country to fresh elections while tackling the crisis's root causes. This means a powerful anti-corruption body, civil service reform, and youth employment incentives to stem brain drain. This path requires immense trust building, but success would ease tensions and open a new chapter of participatory, accountable governance. The second, more perilous scenario is fragmentation and continued unrest. The movement's decentralized nature could become its fatal flaw if no credible leadership emerges. A power vacuum could form, filled by competing interests. Imagine streets where youth activists, party loyalists, and resurgent pro-monarchy groups clash not just with security forces but with each other. This prolonged instability would cripple Nepal's economy, devastating its tourism sector and scaring off investment. In this chaos, security crackdowns would intensify, not to restore order but to impose control, locking the nation in a vicious cycle of protest and repression. The third possibility is a return to the status quo but with a tighter grip. Here, the government weathers the storm using force, cosmetic concessions, and protester exhaustion. We might see a cabinet reshuffle or symbolic promises, but no meaningful structural reform. Instead, the state's control would be strengthened through restrictive new laws on public assembly and online speech. Key protest leaders would be marginalized, leaving activists demoralized. This might bring a superficial calm, but it's a fragile peace. By ignoring the root causes of inequality and corruption, the system merely resets the timer on a ticking time bomb for the next generation. Before I conclude, here are some key questions to keep in mind. Can youth-led movements translate online anger into durable political change in Nepal? Will Nepal's political elite and security forces recognize the legitimacy of young people's grievances? How will Nepal balance the regulation of social media and online spaces more broadly with fundamental rights of expression? Might this crisis push Nepal to rethink its development model? For example, shifting from elite-driven growth to more inclusive, youth-oriented policies? How will neighboring countries, India, China, respond to ongoing instability? And will regional actors play a constructive or exploitative role? In conclusion, Nepal today stands at a crossroads. What began as a policy decision, shutting down social media platforms, has turned into a profound uprising led by a generation demanding dignity, accountability, and opportunity. The protests reflect deep, long-standing fractures in Nepali society: economic inequality, corruption, generational disenfranchisement, and weak political institutions. Whether Nepal emerges from this crisis with a reformed political settlement, renewed popular trust, and more opportunities for its young people, or descends into deeper unrest and authoritarian retrenchment, remains to be seen. What is clear, however, is that the voice of Nepal's Gen Zers, online and offline, can no longer be ignored. Thank you. Please subscribe.